Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the Byzantine Empire, but as we do that, we're actually going to be talking about how the Roman Empire ended. So let's look at this animated map of the history of the Roman Empire, starting from the very beginning. Now, Rome, of course, started as this little tiny dot right there, the city of Rome, and we see that very quickly it starts to expand out into the Boot, and around the year 200 BCE, it starts to take over more of Europe, until around the time of 140 AD, you have the Roman Empire all over the Mediterranean region. Now, it gets so big that it's difficult to manage, and so the Romans come up with an interesting idea. They decide to split the empire into two. One is the east, and one is the west. And as you see around the year 400, the west starts to fall apart, and the east continues. Now we're up into the 500s, the 600s, the 700s, and you'll see that the Byzantine Empire, what started as the Eastern Roman Empire, is going to continue now into the year 1000, 1200, all the way up until the year 1453. Now, the Byzantine Empire is an interesting empire, and as you can see, it existed for 1,000 years, from around 330 CE until 1453. And as we saw in that video, really started here with the division of the Eastern Roman Empire. So we had the Roman Empire here that, of course, was based here in Rome and was overseeing all of the Western Roman Empire. That's the one we typically think of as the Roman Empire. But what they did is they set up a separate district with a separate emperor, even over here in Constantinople, a city that is now Istanbul, Turkey, a city that was started by Constantine, hence the name Constantinople, and that controlled this entire area of the Eastern Mediterranean, including over here, this is Greece, down here, this is Egypt, over here is the Middle East, that's what is now Syria, Israel, the region where Christianity began. Now, this shows us, of course, how the Roman Empire, meaning the Western Roman Empire, collapsed. They were invaded by all these Germanic tribes, and Huns. They came in and they started to take over this very wealthy empire. However, if you notice here, they did not manage to touch very much of the Eastern Roman Empire. And Constantinople itself was never attacked the way that Rome was. And this entire area went untouched by the invading barbarians. So basically, what we're looking at here on this slide is just the fact that what I said before, that the Byzantine Empire really rose out of the Roman Empire, and it's really a continuation of that. Now, the most important of all the emperors of the Byzantine Empire was Justinian. And Justinian ruled along with his wife Theodora, and they were a very powerful couple. They both came from unusual backgrounds. Justinian was poor. His wife was also poor. She was an actress and a dancer. He met her in some kind of theater. They fell in love. They got married. And they became the most important couple, most important rulers in the history of the Byzantine Empire. Now, and she was right there with him as an important advisor, and actually did a lot to advocate for the rights of women in the Byzantine Empire. But perhaps the thing that Justinian is most famous for is the Justinian Code, the Code of Justinian. And what he did is, at a time when all of Western Europe and Rome was collapsing and the barbarians were invading and destroying buildings and tearing up things, Justinian came in and he took the laws that had been built over all these years by the Romans, and he preserved them, and he put them together in a giant book that was called the Justinian Code, a collection of books, really. Um, and he began to teach these and make sure these were taught in law schools throughout the Byzantine Empire. So in this way, all that Roman law survived the fall of the city of Rome, and it survived here in the Byzantine Empire. Now, the Byzantine economy was based partly on agriculture. There were peasants who worked the land, and they had an interesting organization system. Now, we've talked about there's different ways that empires administer their land, that they run their land. And so what they did in the Byzantine was something called the theme system. The theme system was the idea that the military, different divisions of the military that were under a certain general, were given a certain piece of land that they were in charge of. So think of it as like a state or a province or a district. But rather than having a governor or something like that, instead they had a general who would rule this district, and his army soldiers were responsible for that region, protecting the peasants, also making sure that the land was worked. And so this was just a unique thing that the Byzantines did in order to administer their empire. Now, as you can imagine, how did the Byzantines stay strong and stay rich? The answer, of course, is trade. Because if you look at the world map and we look at the Silk Road right here, you can tell, obviously, it goes from China, and we know that it heads toward Europe, but it goes right here through the heart of the Byzantine Empire, right here. So the Byzantines are going to continue to get wealthy from trade along the Silk Road. Even though there's a little bit less trade during this time for various factors, there's not as much money in Rome and Europe. Barbarians aren't really interested in buying silk. That's not their style. So trade is going to go down. Obviously, disease is also going to have a big impact on that. But the trade that does continue will very much go through the Byzantine Empire. Now, also, very importantly, is that the Byzantines discovered the ancient Chinese secret of how to make silk. The story goes that some monks from the Byzantine Empire saw silkworms, realized that silk was made by silkworms, and they took some eggs from the silkworms out of China very much illegally, hidden in their canes and their staffs. They brought them back to the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantine Empire began to create silk, which of course was the most prized luxury item still at that time. Now, just like Rome, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, was very much an important big city with restaurants and theaters. They had a hippodrome where they would watch the chariot races, all kinds of palaces and homes for the rich, etc., etc. Just, again, very much like Rome. And I love this part about the blues and the greens. Just like in many places, in many countries, there were sports rivalries. Just like we have the Houston Texans, the Dallas Cowboys as a big rivalry. You know, in the Byzantine Empire, you had the blues and the greens. They were two groups of fans for chariot races. They would get in fights, like a lot of times fans of sports teams do. But in this case, they were so massive, these riots. There was actually a riot where they say 30,000 people ended up dying in this riot. Absolutely incredible, and cannot believe that we're still talking about some sports fans 1,500 years later. Now, here you can see a great image of the city of Constantinople, and we can see the buildings. We have very nice buildings and churches. This is the hippodrome. That's where they would have had the chariot races. What else do we have? We have, of course, the city walls. And then if you notice here, we have ships. Now, Constantinople is very strategically located. Let me go back to the map, because Constantinople is right here at the opening to the Black Sea here, where you've got all kinds of access to trade. Here is the Aegean Sea with Greece, and of course the Mediterranean Sea. So for Constantinople, the ocean, the navy was very, very important to them, and it was a very, very strategic location. Now, of all the buildings built in the Byzantine Empire, the most famous is by far the Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia was a church built by Justinian there in the heart of Constantinople. And as you can see from this picture, it's a massive building. It's a beautiful building. And what's so interesting about it is that later, when the area that we now call Turkey ends up becoming taken over by Muslim people, particularly by the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans did not destroy the church that was built so beautifully by Justinian, but instead they converted it into a mosque. And so you see the inside of this building looks very much like a church, but you have signs here in Arabic that are, that are about Islam. And you see that outside they've made minarets, which are a sign of mosques around the world. So, again, looking at the Byzantine Empire, you see how it extended. They managed to actually take some of the area that used to be part of the Western Roman Empire back, and at one point they actually took back Rome. And you see also pressure here from the Sassanid Empire, which was sort of connected with the Persian Empire, and they're going to be a rival to the Byzantines. Now, as Islam begins, which will happen around the time of 600, there will start to be clashes between Islam and the Islamic states and the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantine Empire, just like every empire, is going to have battles constantly. Now, one of their innovations that's so interesting, one of their inventions is the use of something called Greek fire. And basically what they discovered was a substance, probably like a petroleum product, some kind of oil, that they could light on fire and shoot at enemy ships. And as you can see in this picture here, not only is it very effective in, killing people, but more importantly, it sets the ships on fire. It was a closely guarded secret how they used or how they developed Greek fire. But you can actually find some YouTube videos if you want to see people trying to recreate Greek fire. Here we see that as the Islamic empires grew, first down here the blue in Arabia, later they're going to start to expand all the way up in here, and they're going to start to take around the year 660 much of the land that belonged to the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantine Empire is going to shrink, although of course it will still last another 1,000 years. Now, a couple things that are significant, that are famous about the Byzantine Empire. Obviously, the fact that they continued the traditions of the Roman Empire. They also had a pretty good education system, not as good as China, but pretty good for something for an empire in Europe and the Middle East. About 30% of people knew how to read, which was a lot back in that time. They did have some school systems, and they kept scholarship. And what we mean by scholarship is that they maintained some of the books, some of the literature, some of the architecture, some of the arts that existed in Greece and then existed in Rome, but had been destroyed in Rome. And then probably the most important or significant for today is the impact of the church in the Byzantine Empire. Now, the branch of the Christian church that existed and flourished in the Byzantine Empire was what ended up becoming called the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, in the Byzantine Empire, they had a very different idea about the church and the emperor than existed in Rome. And in Rome, the Pope was very independent, and eventually the Pope in Rome will become more powerful than even kings and emperors. But in the Byzantine Empire, it was the opposite. The emperor was the head of the government, and he was really basically the head of the church. He would be appointing the patriarchs, which were basically the popes. So the emperor had a lot of control. And this term, Caesaropapism, is important. It's basically the idea that the emperor is over the pope, the emperor is over the church, and that the church serves the emperor. Here's some pictures of icons. You can see a picture of me and a church here in Houston. It's a Eastern Orthodox church. And you can see in this church beautiful images of Jesus, of various people from the Christian religion. And these pictures are what they call icons. I'm at this church because I know this tradition very well. In fact, I was raised in the Eastern Orthodox Church. My mother is still Eastern Orthodox, and so I took this picture when I went to church with her very recently. Now, the icons are something that exists today and are important in the Eastern Orthodox Church. But there was some controversy in the Byzantine Empire about the use of icons. And this was called the Iconoclasm controversy. Basically, there are parts of the Bible that say you should not make images of God. There are ideas in the Bible that you should not pray or worship to any kind of image. And basically, Emperor Leo III in 726 came up with the idea that they should get rid of the icons. And this was called iconoclasm. And the people didn't like it. And eventually the iconoclasm movement ended and the icons came back to the church. But it's an interesting little segment of Byzantine history. And it also has something to do with the influence of Islam, which Islam believes very strongly in not portraying an image of God or the Prophet Muhammad or other religious figures. In fact, they don't even believe in portraying pictures of humans at all. But we'll talk about that in another lesson. I just want to mention also while we're here that the Byzantine theology, their ideas of Christianity were very much influenced by Greek philosophy. Now, this is something kind of interesting about the Byzantine Empire, and I put down here the little advertisement for Constantine TV show. I never saw the TV show, but it's interesting. There's something about Constantine, the Byzantines, that perhaps those who know a little bit about it know that some of their ideas about religion and are a little unusual, a little extreme. And a great example of that is asceticism. Now, asceticism exists in several religions, many religions, in fact. But when it comes to Christianity, the Eastern Orthodox focused more on asceticism than others. And asceticism basically means to deny yourself or to suffer or to do something on purpose to make your life more difficult. And you imagine this, these are we're talking about monks. You know, we're talking about monks who take a vow of poverty, monks who decide to only wear basic clothing, eat very basic food, and they believe that this leads to spiritual enlightenment. Now, one of my favorite examples of extreme asceticism is the Pillar Saints. And you see a picture over here, an icon, in fact, of these guys. Now, these Pillar Saints decided to climb up a pillar and to stay there. for years and years and years. In fact, one pillar saint, according to history, according to church history, lived on the top of a pillar for 37 years. Now, yes, somebody was bringing him food. I do not believe anybody was bringing him shelter. I do not know the details of it. You should definitely look it up. But here you have these guys who are doing a very extreme act as a show of devotion to their religion. Now, the Byzantines, along with asceticism, monasteries, monks were extremely important in the Byzantine religion, in the Eastern Orthodox religion. They still are today, just like they are in Buddhism. And the monasteries were a place where monks were gathering and people were talking about religion. It was also a place that offered social services, hospitals, orphanages, things like that. Not necessarily a lot of learning. They were not schools, so to speak, but they were a place where people discussed religion. Now, just like the Roman Empire split between the East and the West, the religions are also going to have a split. Christianity is going to split for the first time in its history. Now, despite all the barbarians invading Rome, there was still a pope in Rome, and then there were religious leaders in the Byzantine Empire. Now, after 1,000 years of Christianity being one basic church, eventually they are going to split, and that is going to be called the Great Schism in the year 1054. Now, why did it happen? There was rivalry between the two sides. There were some differences on religious differences, and you can see here, some of the differences. Maybe the most interesting is the priest could not marry in the Roman Catholic Church, but in the East, they thought it was fine for priests to get married. But really the most important maybe is just who's the boss. And the Pope in Rome wanted to be the boss. The religious leaders in the Byzantine Empire wanted to be the boss. And eventually, of course, this will cause the church to split. And this is when you first have two divisions of the Christian church. One, the Eastern Orthodox, based in the Byzantine Empire, and the other, the Roman Catholic. Okay, now I've got a couple short answer questions for you. It's one short answer question with 3 parts. Section A, identify and explain 2 ways that the Byzantine Empire was a continuation of the Roman Empire. B, identify and explain 2 reasons that the Byzantine Empire thrived while Rome was destroyed in 476 CE. And now I've got a quote for you. Theodora was the greatest woman in Roman history and was in fact the first feminist, fighting to improve the lives of women in a patriarchal society. Identify and describe evidence that would support this opinion of Theodora. Since we didn't talk about that in the PowerPoint, obviously I want you to research that online. But Theodora is a really interesting woman, and I'm really looking forward to you doing a little bit of research on that. Remember that we're looking for about 3 high-quality sentences for each of the sections. If I'm asking for 2 ways, then it would be do 3 sentences on each of the ways. So that would be, I guess, 6 for section A, maybe 6 sentences for section B, and then section C, 3 to 5 sentences, whatever will express your opinion. And that's all we have today on the Byzantine Empire.